Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this month's edition of Wor Culture. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Vi Pollock. I'm the Dean of Culture and Creative Arts at Newcastle, so I look after the university's arts and humanities portfolio. And Wor Culture is a platform, or a gathering as we like to call it, that we started last summer, and it aims to give us a platform to discuss issues that are raised by and of relevance to the culture and creative arts sector in the Northeast. And what's really, although the university facilitates it, we like to think of it as something we kind of all own, for want of a better word, together. And so what's been great, particularly over the last few editions, is that you've been suggesting topics for us to address, you've been suggesting speakers, some of you have been coming forward as speakers, and that's something we really encourage and welcome. Just before I introduce today's event, just to give you a heads up that our next event will be on March the 25th at 12:30. I'm picking up on the Future of Work event that we did last summer. It's likely to focus around skills and what kind of skills we're going to need as we move forward from the COVID-19 lockdown situation and the sector starts opening up. Recent research has shown that under 25s and disabled artists and those from minority groups are likely to be the hardest hit. So how do we better enable what skills are needed, how do we make them accessible, how do we make them affordable, and how do we encourage diversity and inclusion in the way we're thinking about the sector of the future. So if you have anybody you'd like to hear from around that, or if you'd like to contribute, do get in touch with me. And then we've got a special event on April the 22nd, which is World Earth Day. And I won't say too much about that now, but a couple of contributors and participants in our gathering are co-curating that with us. So we're very much looking forward to that. And thinking about kind of global and world things is quite relevant for today, because in the wake of Brexit and the global pandemic and everything that's been going on, we thought it was an opportune time to ask the question, what does it mean to be international now? And we're delighted to welcome three colleagues to sort of share their experiences of thinking around the implications of particularly Brexit for the cultural sector. We've got Charlotte Faucher from the University of Manchester, who pre-Brexit carried out a research report called Arts After Brexit. And so Charlotte's going to talk to us about some of her findings. And then we have, many of you will know Clymene Christoforou, who's the founding member and executive director of D6 Culture in Transit, which has over 20 years of experience developing programmes around social and environmental justice, working with over 300 artists and organisations, mainly from the EU member states, but also globally. And Clymene has also been heavily involved in Culture Action Europe and initiatives in Brussels. So she's going to talk to us about her experience. And we're also delighted to welcome Ali Walton-Robson, who is the creative director of Headway Arts. And Ali has been coordinating international projects for the last 10 years, mainly through the Erasmus Plus programme. And Headway have a particular focus on working with learning disabled and working class young people, and including them in this international culture and skills dialogue. So there's obviously quite significant implications for them as they move forward, thinking through what is currently quite unknown territory around what Brexit means to the cultural sector. So we're hoping for a very lively, engaged discussion. I think all of our speakers can't give you answers, but can discuss experiences. And hopefully this is the foundation for something we might pick up in a future event. So if Charlotte is around, now Charlotte's on her phone because we have some technical issues, so bear with us, and Bob in COVID briefing style fashion is going to change the slides for Charlotte. So we'll have the three speakers together, one after the other. Please post questions in the chat and I'll try and kind of collate them for a bit of a Q&A after that. Then we'll have a slight break and we'll go off into our breakout rooms. So Bob, if you can do the slides and if I can invite Charlotte to start our discussion. Charlotte, over to you. And
hi everyone. Welcome. Hi V. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'll remove my video just so that the 4G, I can give a chance to the 4G, but thank you so much V for inviting me. And thank you Bob as well. So I'm a researcher at the University of Manchester, and over the summer I conducted a project with Tom Fleming Creative Consultancy and my university to look at the impact of Brexit on the arts sector. So Bob, if you could please go to the next slide. So I interviewed around 30 art administrators in the UK and in EU member states. I also spoke with councillor and European cultural groups in the UK, like the Goethe Institute, the French Institute, etc., to get a sense of their views on the matter. I must say that I really struggled to find anyone who was pro-Brexit, because I think that's just kind of reveals a deep Europhilia amongst the sector. I did speak to people who work in leave areas, but it was quite difficult, even speaking with a Tory councillor. She told me that she'd supported remaining in the EU. So yeah. Anyway, the aim of the report was to explore the impact of the UK's withdrawal from the European Union in the arts sector. And I guess my starting point was to think that the EU had been such a vital organ of solidarity and investment across this sector, and that it would have a tremendous impact on the sector. I was thinking in terms of emotions, and I really did sense a deep attachment to not only the EU, but mostly what the EU meant for people in terms of networking and knowledge sharing. I was also focusing on funding, and thirdly, I was focusing on strategies. What does it mean for institutions to kind of readapt their strategy? So Bob, if you could go to the next slide, please. So thinking about the contribution of the EU to the art sector in the UK, it's really broad, but I split in four kind of broad categories. And I guess funding and the single market and freedom of travel. Also European legislations were the obvious one, but the knowledge exchange networks was the one that surprised me, because perhaps I'm a historian of cultural diplomacy rather than a practitioner. But a lot of the people told me that they were really upset about the idea of being kept out of knowledge exchange, like sharing schemes, etc., attending conferences, because these have been so important. And I think this is something that the government and UK agencies need to take in mind, this idea of reciprocity that isn't just there in funding schemes, but also just in conferences, etc. So next slide, please, Bob. So since the referendum results, the sector and the different federations of in the creative sector have been fighting for clarity over trade barriers, intellectual property, freedom of movement, and funding. And as I said, I conducted the research for the report over the summer and in September and October 2020. And it was very striking that the people I interviewed told me, actually, we've been fighting over these issues for 4 years and we still don't have clarity. And I think this is very much still the case today. And that's why what Viva was saying earlier is very important. We need to continue the discussion, because obviously there is a lot of work being done on these issues at the moment. And I think the sector can achieve some or can reach some improvement working with government agencies. So next slide, please. So the key conclusion was this idea of a 2-year hiatus. So I'm not saying that with once a deal had been agreed and you know, on the 31st of December 2020, there would be no EU-UK cultural projects anymore. But I found that a lot of institutions, including quite large ones like Home in Manchester, had refrained from engaging with new schemes and with new projects because they weren't sure whether it'd be financially viable to launch these schemes. And although many of these institutions are a charity status, they also need to run a very clean budget sheet. So that was very important for them in thinking about their strategies. The damage of leaving Creative Europe without a replacement fund is huge for the sector. There is a replacement fund for Erasmus, the Turin scheme, although there are a lot of issues with this scheme. But for Creative Europe, which is the main kind of funding scheme at EU level, the government has yet to announce anything similar. There's also, leaving this scheme also means a loss of leadership on the part of UK organizations. So the ability to shape projects and to shape partnerships will no longer be there. And of course, that brings a bigger question of the UK soft power. The potential impact, obviously, this still remains to be seen, but different agencies that are measuring soft power have showed that since 2016, UK soft power has been declining softly, especially among countries of the G20 network. And obviously the sector, I think this is something we might discuss a bit more today, but the sector needs to address the overlapping consequences of Brexit and COVID-19. So next slide, please. I did highlight some solutions. I was very pleased to see when I was preparing that I think Newcastle is part of a EU scheme that's called Eurocities. It's not cultural primarily, but culture does feature in this network of transnational European cities. It's quite expensive to join in. Quite a few cities like Milton Keynes have told me they just can't afford the membership fee of, I think it's 15,000 euros per year. But I think around 20 cities in Britain are part and will remain part of this network. So that's one solution for quite a lot of cities. Engaging with European cultural institutes in Britain. So I've mentioned the Goethe and the Cervantes Institutes, for example, and these institutions are gathered within UNIC. And if you don't know it, I will really encourage you to look it up and join, reach out to them, because they are very, very keen to continue working with UK institutions. There will obviously be international schemes with the British Council and the Arts Council England. With, for me, I think the maybe the issue that the British Council has been very global in its outlook. Of course, it's its role, but Europe has never been the main focus or the main kind of target audience of its policies, and I doubt this will change over the next 10 years, but I might be wrong. They mostly focus on kind of the Asian markets and the Latin American markets, and gradually also the African market. And there's also kind of ad hoc one-off solutions. So I spoke with Cite in Sheffield, the gallery, and they've been developing a partnership with a similar institution in Germany, and they're hoping to apply to EU funding with this institution. And the Great Yarmouth Conservation Trust has told me that they are opening a branch in Eastern Europe. They've traditionally been working with Eastern European countries over the last decades, so they're very keen to continue this work. And for them, it's just not possible to do it from Great Yarmouth in terms of visa and law, etc. So they are just opening another kind of branch of their trust there. Next slide, please. So in 2021, we still need a lot of clarity. The sector still needs to know where they can get funding for EU, and the sector is still, and you might know that there are still a lot of petitions to kind of change the visa regime for artists and for touring, etc. But we do know that many funding avenues are no longer possible, and that visits and touring will cost more. The EU is still discussing the next round of a large funding because, you know, they work in 7 years and 2020 was the end of the previous round. So for 2021, 2027 or 8. And there is the question of the UK's eligibility for some funding scheme, whether or not the UK will be a third party, and what this will mean exactly is still to be determined. And obviously this is also at EU level that these discussions take place. And we also probably won't know the full impact of Brexit until we emerge from the pandemic. So the uncertainty that I've been identifying, you know, before the deal, I think is still so present, and that's why it's very important to be sharing what we do know. And next slide, please. So this is a slightly positive way of ending my talk, but I just want to stress that the EU member states and organizations in these states are very, very keen to be working with UK organizations. So I feel we shouldn't, or UK organizations shouldn't self-censor in terms of their projects. It's worth getting in touch, basically. And for example, the network Eurocity have told me that they are very, very keen to have UK cities in the network because they bring in so much kind of novelty and so much new ideas that are then kind of shared and spread and discussed amongst other EU cities. And I feel just in general that the UK art sector remain very outward-looking and Europhile in its attitude. But perhaps my point as a historian would be that, of course, it's very important that institutions and individuals are very keen and enthusiastic to carry on working with the EU, but what does that mean in terms of the structure? If we don't have the structure, the networks and the schemes that support this attitude, what will remain in, say, 10 years' time? And the very final slide is just, I think these kind of networks and workshops are so important. And there are still information that we can get from the Erasmus desks, which will be closing, but not until all of the projects have been completed, for example, so in probably late 2021. And also I've shared a questionnaire with Bob about some of the kind of big issues that the sector is facing related to Brexit. And I think Bob will be sharing it with you, and I would really appreciate it if you have time to fill it in. Obviously, if you know it fits some of the things that you yourself have been struggling with as part of an institution. If you want to leave your name or your contact details, I can also let you know of another event on Brexit and the UK art sector that will be organizing probably in June. So please do get in touch via this questionnaire or through my email address. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your question and discussion later on.
That's brilliant, Charlotte. Thank you. And if you have any questions from Charlotte, do post them in the chat. And Bob has already posted a link to Charlotte's questionnaire in the chat, and we'll also circulate it with the wrap-up material from the event. But without further ado, I'd like to invite Clymene to come to talk to us about her experience of working in this climate. Over to you, Clymene.
Right, lovely. Thank you very much. And Charlotte, thank you very much. So there'll be a little bit of repetition from what Charlotte has said, but maybe putting it into practice as an arts project. So a really great introduction. Thank you so much for that. So my name is Clymene Christoforou. I'm a director of D6 Culture in Transit. I'm also a board member of D6EU, which I'll say a little bit more about later. I'm the chair of International Newcastle, and I'm a board member of Res Artis, which is the worldwide network of artist residencies. Mostly going to talk here about the work of D6, and we're visual arts producers working internationally and interculturally, connecting artists, partners and communities. And our collaborations are based around shared social and environmental concerns and ambitions. So for example, in 2014, Corners, a big European project, connected places on the edge of Europe as diverse as Kosovo, the Arctic Circle and Blythe. So through a programme of residencies, commissions and events with 55 artists across 11 countries, it focused on places built for an industry that was no longer there. So from the East Durham coalfields to steel production in Taranto in southern Italy, to local industries in Gdansk or San Sebastian. And here we see a final performance in San Sebastian connecting to both Belfast and Blythe. So our current Creative Europe programme is Contested Desires, and this looks at our shared colonial history and its impact on culture and society today. So from the colonisers of Portugal, Spain, Italy and the UK to the colonised of Barbados and Cyprus. Contested Desires is a capacity building programme for artists and cultural professionals to understand how the issue of colonisation is being addressed in our arts and heritage sector, with some countries who have a long history of addressing the subject and others who are just starting out on this journey. What you're looking at here is the work of Leeds-based artist Aquila Bertram, whose residency in Lagos, Portugal, produced Dearly Beloved, a memorial to the slaves that passed through this trading port, people whose lives remain undocumented and unmourned, and on whose backs the wealth of this city was built. We're bringing Contested Desires back to the UK this year, although it might be pushed to next year now, with a programme in partnership with the National Trust, who will receive 3 international artists in residence along the borderlands of Hadrian's Wall, along with a conference that further bring the discussions home. At D6, we've got a very long history of uncovering the international in our everyday, bringing international artists to work alongside diaspora communities like Thomas Speyer at the time that Newcastle saw large numbers of Polish migrants coming to settle. His work Border Crossing was in 2007 and created a temporary border crossing on Northumberland Street, inviting shoppers to share the experience of coming into the UK. From 2011, with Homelands, we worked with Slovakian artists Zuzana Hroskova and Marek Sulik over a 2-year period to capture conversations between the newly arrived Roma community in Newcastle, families in Slovakia, and local residents in the West End. The resulting commissions were shown at festivals in the UK and across Europe. More recently, with artist Henna Asikainen and refugee and migrant communities, we produced a programme which considered our shared understanding of the countryside through a series of walks through heritage sites. This work continues with the National Trust over the next 18 months, connecting resettled families in Newcastle and East Durham. This work with migrants and refugees has made us aware of a number of artists who've arrived here, leading us to develop the region's first studio sanctuary to offer support to those arriving in our region. And thanks to the huge contribution made by some brilliant volunteers over the past 9 months, we're now ready to welcome our first artists from Pakistan and Syria. Kind of finally, in this introduction to our work, I'm going to touch on D6EU. I mean, you will all have read last month a somewhat shocking presentation by the Department of International Trade that we should all think about setting up our businesses in the EU to continue our work, and that warehouses in the Netherlands and Belgium are now being filled up with British goods, sidestepping the UK. In partnership with established friends and colleagues in Cyprus and registered with the Ministry of Culture, D6 has been set up to focus on our international development and capacity building around sustainability, equity and cultural heritage. I mean, it's becoming bizarre that an organisation of our scale should have to do something like this. I have to say that when I was asked to do this, I struggled. I could have struggled to prepare a presentation, and I couldn't quite at first realise why, because I am on the whole quite a positive person, and like Charlotte at the end of her presentation wanted to give some good stories. But I am this month particularly saddened by our country's international relations. And so to be honest about our international working, I also have to be honest about our concerns. What upset me this week was a meeting we had with our partners about a continuation and expansion of our Contested Desires project. This is a project that we have driven. We are the lead organisation, and it grew from a deep need to address our own colonial history and the current hostile environments created by our governments. It grew from a desire post-referendum to understand what it meant to be European, both positively and in acknowledgement of our shared problematic histories and their legacies. With our partners and artists, we've nurtured an ambitious programme that does not shy away from difficult conversations. Contested Desires is funded by the Creative Europe programme with match funding in the UK. Our ambition was that this 2-year programme would serve as a pilot for a much larger programme. A contemporary art programme that continues its uncomfortable questions with wider geographies, including Africa, South America, and former Soviet states. And here is an extraordinary map of countries colonised by Europe from the 1500s onwards. So the meeting we had this week was with one of our partners who had agreed to take on the lead role, a role that we cannot now do now that we have left the Creative Europe programme. In many ways, this was a really positive conversation with real momentum to continue, but it's just so bittersweet for us. For D6 Culture in Transit in the UK, we are no longer eligible to lead or even be a full partner. We are relegated to a much diminished third country role, which in effect means we can be commissioned to deliver some small elements as a subcontractor, but can no longer be central in its design and shaping. The announcement that the UK would withdraw from Creative Europe came a year ago. And of course, we held out hope that if Erasmus and Horizon was still on the table, then perhaps Creative Europe might creep back in too. Sadly, that was not the case. What upset us more recently, and Charlotte, you alluded to this, but this was a discovery from the mouths of DCMS themselves, that there will not be a UK replacement fund mooted by DCMS. And it was no longer happening. And whilst Erasmus does have, as you say, a Turin programme as a replacement, although perhaps a much poorer version than the original Erasmus, there'll be no such UK replacement for culture. So not only can we not lead our new Contested Desires programme, we cannot even reassure our partners that we can bring any money to tangentially support our continued involvement. Then there is the issue of freedom of movement and goods. We are more than disappointed with the final outcomes of the UK-EU negotiations and the impact this has had on travelling artists, both in and out of the UK. Now, it seems to us that whilst there have been negotiations going on with DCMS, the Arts Council and other sector bodies in relation to the arts and culture and our relationship with Europe, we've actually been failed on every count. In the 4 years since the referendum, we've failed to sign up for Creative Europe. We failed to have any dispensation for cultural visas. We failed to secure a UK alternative culture fund. And unlike the agriculture and fisheries sector with DEFRA, we failed to provide central sector-specific guidance on international working, relying instead on support agencies who are working very hard to serve their members as best they can. But it's all too slow, and there's an urgency for guidance now. And for a small organisation like ours with stretched capacity, it's doubly difficult. We now have to address all areas we once took for granted. Frustrated by the lack of information, we've had to be quick off the mark because we have artists off to places as soon as COVID restrictions lift, and we cannot afford to wait. Thanks to the support of Newcastle University, we're just about to take on an intern to get to grips with what it means for our travelling artists and goods. This will involve country-specific considerations of work permits, visas, alongside implications for healthcare, insurance and data roaming, and some art form-specific consideration for visual artists who might differ in their needs to musicians and performers, for example. To perhaps try to finish on a more positive note, I want to remind us that there are people out there to help, and the importance that we should all put on engaging with networks. I mean, you will all have your own, but as small fish, and I guess as large as well, it's important that we find these spaces to amplify our voices and to coalesce around shared values and needs. There are many UK networks that some of you will be involved with, and for us in the UK, these are the Creative Industries Federation, CVAM, Contemporary Visual Arts Network and AN, all of whom are supporting the sector to work across borders and hurriedly trying to provide information on artist mobility, with some of them starting to lobby for the inclusion of a Creative Europe alternative in the next comprehensive spending review. Meanwhile, it's good to remember that there are ample international European arts networks that will add value to the work we do as artists, as arts professionals and as advocates, helping us to maintain those international connections, breaking down the borders that our government has set up. Here you'll see a number that we, our board and current partnerships, are members of, from the political platform of Culture Action Europe to the newly formed Disorderly Women, the European Alliance of Women Cultural Leaders, to Res Artis, the worldwide network of artist residencies. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to thank you for listening, and I look forward to catching up in the conversations in the breakout groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clymene. Showcasing some fantastic work and partnerships, and really important work, and then heartbreaking to hear the impact of it. And I think our next presentation is going to sort of further outline some of those impacts. So Clymene, if you can stop sharing your screen, I'd like to hand over to Ali Walton-Robson, who's going to talk to us about her work at Headway Arts.
So myself and Frances Castle established Headway Arts in Blyth in Northumberland about 25 years ago. And we started as a group of local artists, practitioners and social reformers, I think you could call us, who valued the role of the arts in helping people reach their full potential. So the company began co-creating with working class communities, the communities in which we are based, the communities in which we are of, and who had become marginalised following the decline of traditional industries in the area. Our ethos is to offer opportunities for people to take part in meaningful creative activity, to gain recognition for their skills, and to recognise artistic and creative ambitions. Since 25 years, we've established a diverse programme of inclusive arts provision in Northumberland and beyond, working with many different groups and organisations and partners. We now occupy Art Space, a much loved old church situated in the heart of Blyth, and we've converted the beautiful building to include performance, exhibition, studio and office space. So from here, we aim to run an inspiring, dynamic and high quality programme of creative arts, dance, drama workshops, performances, music events and the slideshows showing you lots of different projects which we've been involved in, and symposiums seeking to advance inclusion in the arts. So our position within one of the most disadvantaged wards in England informs our comprehensive arts programme to the whole community. And we work with around 300 people who are learning disabled and or on the autistic spectrum or who have long-term mental health issues. We'll have an overall footfall of 300 people through the building, 3,000 people a year. So we've particularly strived to include learning disabled young people and young people from working class backgrounds and people of all ages in our international skill shares and intercultural dialogue, creating unique opportunities which support their needs, explore their interests and raise aspiration. And we've achieved this through developing international partnerships, through EU programmes. We were working in ASF training and we began to look at Grundvig and Erasmus+, working with the British Council and ECARIS. So with roughly 2 to 3 projects a year, over 8 years, over a 12-year period, we've established a working network of 15 creative organisations, disabled artists, working in social justice, organisations working to support that work, and with migrants and other marginalised communities across Europe. The aim is to train new workers, offer peer exchange and nurture emerging talent. Through this work, I led on the development of an international arts quality framework for working with learning disabled people and disadvantaged adults in the arts. This was really a commitment to a set of principles facilitating rich and authentic opportunity to people who might not get the chances otherwise, possibly due to prejudice around their ability. So Ken Robinson believed human communities depend upon a diversity of talent, not a singular conception of ability. And Headway Arts place high value on our learning disabled colleagues' unique perspectives, rich contribution to intercultural dialogue, proficiency in the arts, and what they can offer to the sector should the aspirational experiences, supported pathways and the platforms be in place. So some personal background. I had a mother who instinctively valued creativity. She believed in travel as the best education. She encouraged us on school exchanges. And in 1975, a young Turkish guy stopped her in the street to ask directions. So she basically adopted him. His culture and his family very much enriched ours, and I believe his. Our family grew up in a working class mining community, and I was told by school, by a career service and many others, that art would get me nowhere. That's an actual quote, nowhere. Luckily, I had awesome parents, and I also very much knew my own mind. I wanted to go to Istanbul, and I was going to art college. So the Acting Up report, which was commissioned in 2017 by Labour's Deputy Tom Watson, looked at what more could be done to encourage young people to consider a career in the arts. And key findings included the recommendation that casting directors should undergo unconscious bias training to stop them from unintentionally discriminating against certain race or class demographics. Broadcasters, film companies and theatres should do more to develop working class and diverse talent. This takes a reimagination of situation. Through the extraordinary experiences of international mobility, I have witnessed people reimagine their situations, take ownership of their surroundings, and discover hidden possibilities within themselves. An example is our choreographer and dance artist, Paula McLean. She would describe herself as having Down syndrome. And as part of the Headway Arts team, she's been on mobility with us and worked on most of the projects. I asked her if she would run a workshop with a delegation on our real project coming to the UK. And I was ready to help her. This can be a daunting prospect for many people, but she didn't need me. She was well planned and in full possession of her power and creativity. She adeptly handled a workshop with 35 international delegates in 5 spoken languages, Makaton, BSL and Portuguese Sign. So all of our projects have acted as a platform for peer learning, for sharing of international practice and fostered collaboration, which have multiple outcomes in the personal and professional development of all the participants. The unique life-changing experience of international mobility acting as a catalyst, inspiration, aspiration and awakening, reflective practice, encouraging thinking about it. Only a change in thinking can bring about change in actions. Change depends on people. Extraordinary experiences are a catalyst to personal development and change, and participation should absolutely be accessible to all. Art is a human right. Participation is the indispensable condition for the development of democracy. So the B word is upon us, and UK has withdrawn from Erasmus. Gov.uk says the new scheme, the Turin scheme, that replaces and spending 100 million on it, will provide funding for around 35 students in universities and colleges to go on placements and exchanges overseas, starting in September 21. But it does not mention the type of organisations in our partnerships, small, indie, non-PA, artist-led, the fleet of foot, the innovators, the passionate volunteers, applying directly to national agencies. It says the new scheme will also target students from disadvantaged backgrounds and areas which did not previously have many students benefiting from Erasmus+, making life-changing opportunities accessible to everyone. It's promising that the programme will provide similar opportunities for students to study and work abroad as the Erasmus+ programme, but it will include countries across the world. It talks a lot about value for taxpayers. So perhaps this is some reassurance, but there's not as yet much detail, and so we wait. Education Secretary Gavin Williamson says it will expand opportunities to study abroad and more students from all backgrounds will benefit. We'll hold them to that. UK organisations will be invited to bid in early 2021. So, Fran and I will be expecting that invite soon, perhaps by Owl, or maybe Boris will drop it off next time he pops in a newly blue Blythe with another bag of money for gentrification. Then COVID-19 stopped our world. It stopped our arts and aesthetics projects in its path. We saw the writing on the wall and we knew we'd soon be in lockdown because we'd had conversations with our partners in Lisbon. We'd been using Zoom, so on the first day of the first Monday of the first week of lockdown, we found ourselves devising contract improvisation online. Half of our team was shielding, so Fran Castle immediately applied for emergency grants for tech and data packages, and we were successful with CRF. We drove around the county delivering packages to people's doors. Our learning disabled artists have adapted brilliantly, and we pivoted and we kept our community connected and supported online. It's been described as a lifeline. We've made performances as part of our Beautiful Difference ACE funded project work and held an AGM live online in April. We've danced internationally with a hybrid programme, and like many others, that will continue. And we'll continue until everybody feels safe, and we'll make our own roadmap. Due to the very real health fears we have, and a lot of us are defined as very clinically vulnerable. Brexit has also meant the significant loss of the security of the European health insurance card. So this, for European travel within Europe, would have been the last day that you could have applied. Confidence is yet to be found in the new GHIC card, which might not cover all our needs. So reflecting upon health inequalities, I've got to talk about how it's been for learning disabled during COVID. From DNR notices to being 6 times more likely to die during the first wave, it's beyond shocking. A report from Public Health England found the death rate for those with learning disability was 3 times higher in the 18-34 age group. And working online, I've heard daily harrowing first-hand accounts of the terrible lived experience. This is right here and right now in the UK in 2021. Is it not how we treat our most vulnerable that is the measure of a civilization? And as I write, a text informed me that over 150,000 learning disabled people will now be vaccinated in Group 6. It's a bit late. I think this will be a shame history looks back upon with horror. So in the coming times of opening up, this is the context in which we continue to develop our international partnerships, learning, cooperating, working together as we reach out again across the world and towards healing. How can we have a pandemic of cooperation is what I would ask, as opposed to loneliness and exclusion? Can the value of this to taxpayers ever be measured in money? We certainly need inclusion in appropriate and accessible funding streams to continue our work creating access to high quality opportunity and support for life enriching internationalism and innovation, which includes disadvantaged and disabled folks. We must be seen. So as we float our island away from the continent, for the minute we rely on tech as our anchor to connect local to international and human to human. International collaboration has created the vaccine. To end, I'd like to offer you these thoughts, and as Lady Kit described us, we need a culture of kindness. The power of art to build future relationships through shared life-changing experience. To work towards mutual international understanding, and as Joe Cox said, we've got more in common than that which divides us. To discover this, we need continued inclusive intercultural dialogue. Thanks.